Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Now, another firm has issued a Brexit warning. Jaguar Land Rover says that it might have to shut factories in the UK if we don't get the right kind of Brexit deal. Elizabeth Glinker is here. Elizabeth, tell us what Jaguar have said.
Well, fairly unequivocal, really. Jaguar Land Rover, the UK's biggest car manufacturer, says that if we have, in quotes, a bad Brexit deal, that this could cost the company up to £1.2 billion a year, and that would set in jeopardy £80 billion worth of investment that the company has planned for its car plants and production in this country. And to put it into some kind of context, Jaguar Land Rover employs 40,000 people directly, and indirectly the work of around 260,000 people is connected to this company.
So we're talking about a lot of jobs.
Indeed, a lot of jobs. So it is, by any measure, a sort of a fairly important intervention, one might say.
And what's the proposal that Theresa May is said to be presenting to the Cabinet tomorrow on this Chequers away day? Bits and pieces have been briefed, this sort of third way.
It is a third way. I have to get this right because it is essentially a mash-up between the two previous options that we heard of, so you have to make sure you get the words right. It is facilitated customs arrangement. And of course, previously we had been offered the customs arrangement or maximum facilitation. So this really literally is a mashup of those two phrases. And if we think back, back to April, I don't know if you recall when I went to see the Brexit minister, Steve Baker, in his offices on Downing Street, and we had him drawing on the wall with a marker pen,
we can see
trying
him
to explain all of this to me. So on the one hand, we have the customs arrangement, very similar to a customs union, but a situation where the UK would at some stage be having to refund the difference between UK tariffs and European tariffs to the EU at some stage if we went down this route. Massively unpopular with the Brexiteers, that option. The second option was something called maximum facilitation, heavily reliant on technology on our borders, and also something called trusted trader status, which means that the big companies, say a company like Jaguar Land Rover, would be trusted to fill in its own paperwork and know who it needed to pay what to, and so forth. The big issue with that, of course, was the fact that there would be borders, and that raises particular issues for Northern Ireland. So now we have this mashup, or as Number 10 would like us to refer to it probably as the best of both worlds.
Yes.
I guess that depends on how you look at it, where they are saying that the lion's share, up to 96% of what we do, of the trade we do, would be managed by this technology, by this maximum facilitation. There would be this little portion where we might have to do this kind of repayment arrangement, which gives us flexibility potentially in Ireland, but means that the UK can set its own trade deals and, just sort of get on with things on its own.
All right. Well, this new model, Sarah, the facilitated customs arrangement, are you convinced? It's just a fudge, isn't it?
Well, the question is it going to be answering the Northern Ireland question? Is it going to be acceptable to the EU? Does it mean that we end up getting even closer to the deadline when we actually leave without actually an arrangement in place? And I think there are a lot of questions over this. This technology doesn't exist yet, don't forget. So,
what do you think, Chloe?
Well, I mean, the Conservative Party and you yourself ran on a manifesto that pledged to leave the single market and the customs union. And the new customs partnership did appear to be very similar to customs union membership. So if this proposal, this third way option, does involve outsourcing trade policy to Brussels, doesn't give Britain the ability to sign other trade deals, or seriously inhibits Britain's ability to sign trade deals,
sort of
it wouldn't deliver on that manifesto pledge.
The noises coming from government are that the UK would, in all situations, with this option, have the ability to make its own decisions, that if there were any changes to regulations, the UK Parliament would vote on those. There wouldn't be no sort of imposition of EU regulations.
So, but Brussels could establish new rules, but the UK Parliament would have to rubber stamp it.
The customs union is separate from the single market, and it's easy for people to get them mixed up. But in terms of the single market, if we don't have close regulatory arrangements, I'm afraid we're in all sorts of problems with things like medicines, for example. And if we end up crashing out with no deal because of all this this, we're going to end up with very serious problems with our supply chain, and we're going to end up with companies like Jaguar Land Rover and BAE and Airbus leaving the country with the sort of catastrophic implications for our economy.
And do you think Jeremy Corbyn and Labour should stick to their manifesto promises, which were broadly also to leave the single market and the customs union?
I mean, I think obviously the kind of official line of the Labour Party seems to be, for particularly the Parliamentary Labour Party, for a soft Brexit. And my concern is that we're presented right now, really, we have to remember the reasons that there has been such a kind of populist backlash against the European Union that has led to all kinds of other geopolitical events across the world, including the Trump election. We have to, I think, address the legitimate and serious grievances of people. And as I've written today in an article, one of the concerns for myself as a doctor, but also as a citizen, is what post-Brexit trade deals will look like. And for example, a post-Brexit Trump trade deal could be very concerning for the NHS and public service.
Right. Do you think that there is this question of legitimacy, of trust in politics, Sarah, despite the fact that you raise concerns about medicines, that people will think you are not still sticking with the spirit of the referendum result?
Well, the point is the referendum was whether we leave the European Union. We're leaving the European Union, that's been settled, but wasn't on the ballot paper was the type of Brexit that we have. And I think that is down to Parliament to examine the evidence and explain to people if there are very serious consequences for our economy and for things like the supply of medicines, if we don't actually have a close partnership after we leave, then it's for Parliament, I think, to act in the best interests of the country.
And Chloe, what do you say to Airbus, Nissan, BMW and Jaguar, who have all expressed concerns over Brexit? Shouldn't the government listen to them very carefully?
Well, of course the government should listen to businesses, and they are seeking to have a free trade agreement. But I think the EU also needs to listen to European businesses who also very much would benefit from a free trade agreement with the UK. There's a lot to benefit from a good trading relationship. Brexit is about taking the politics out of our trading relationship with the EU. But I'm very concerned, Sarah, about the language you use about Parliament deciding what kind of Brexit that we have, because if it is a Brexit that involves remaining in the single market or the customs union, a lot of Leave voters will feel very betrayed, and also the Conservative Party will not have credibility because you put it to the people in a general election.
Well, people voted for a number of reasons. I mean, when I went round my constituency and asked people, a lot of people were saying to me, well, we wanted to remain in a single market. They talked about the fact that they joined effectively a common market, but what they didn't want was the close political alignment. So I think to say that people all voted on a single reason is just not true. Of course, a lot of people did vote on the issue of immigration, but wouldn't it be strange if we were leaving just at the time when the European Union itself is waking up to those concerns, and we could find ourselves crashing out just at a time when some of those concerns are being dealt with already.
Right. I mean, in terms of support, though, Jacob Rees-Mogg, leading Conservative, has threatening to withdraw his support. Is this something Mrs May should take seriously?
She should call his bluff. And I'm afraid if there are members of the Cabinet who are not prepared to sign up to a sensible Brexit that protects jobs and the economy, they should be sacked or leave. It's absolutely impossible to have a situation where we've got a Cabinet all saying different things. It's all very well for backbenchers, but for the Cabinet, they should be following the government line and have collective Cabinet responsibility. So if they're not happy with that, they should get out.
But these Cabinet Ministers are defending a manifesto pledge.
If
Theresa May offers an arrangement that is in breach of the Conservative Party manifesto pledge to leave the customs union, surely those ministers would be in their rights to reject that.
Right.
No, I'm sorry, I disagree. You sign up for collective Cabinet responsibility. If you're not prepared for that, you have to get out, because you're damaging the government's position, and she needs to call their bluff. This has gone on for far too long.
Let's have a look at the Telegraph front page. Chloe, you mentioned that actually the EU should be doing more in terms of listening to businesses there. Well, we have the Brexit Secretary here, David Davis, warning Theresa May in a letter that the EU just won't buy this deal, which some people have said is a fudge, or as Lizzie was saying, this sort of mash-up between the two customs partnership and maximum facilitation. What do you think?
Well, the EU have been very clear that you're either in or out of these arrangements.
No cherry-picking.
Exactly. So we should, and Theresa May said in her Lancaster House speech, we're leaving the single market and customs union. I think that was very clear. And so there's a bit of confusion with also Cabinet Ministers like Greg Clark come out and place some confusion or doubt on whether or not Britain is leaving those institutions.
Right. I mean, Theresa May is meeting Angela Merkel. And do you think there is more chance of her getting her way with Angela Merkel? She wants to line up, obviously, EU nations before she presents this to the Cabinet, more than David Cameron did.
I think it's very, very difficult to say. Angela Merkel herself is facing a huge political crisis right now in Germany, and it's quite possible that in the coming weeks there could be the collapse of the coalition there. But I think what this debate has illustrated very clearly is that the real kind of grievances and issues that people voted for, in many ways this was a protest vote because people were upset about about housing, about public services, healthcare and so on. And even though a lot of those problems originate actually in Westminster, I think it's very important that we look at progressive solutions in the form of what Brexit will be. And there are progressive arguments to be made for sovereignty rather than simply looking at either the status quo or right-wing populism. And what we've seen particularly from conservative Eurosceptics, sadly, and from people like Nigel Farage is a kind of ventriloquism of the Vox Populi, of the people's voice. It's masquerading as that. And in fact, though many of those people from my position don't seem to be representing interests of ordinary people.
All right, Elizabeth, thank you very much for coming in.
The UK's biggest car maker, Jaguar Land Rover, has warned a bad Brexit deal would hit profits and threaten billions of pounds worth of investment plans for the country. The chief executive of Jaguar Land Rover, which is owned by India's Tata Motors, said the car market needed free and frictionless trade with the EU and unrestricted access to the single market in order to ensure future success. The Prime Minister has said she hopes her cabinet will be able to discuss and decide on a substantive way forward on Brexit tomorrow. Meeting German Chancellor Angela Merkel this afternoon, Theresa May said she hoped this would lead to an increase in the pace and intensity of the UK's negotiations with the EU. Our Europe editor Katya Adler is in Berlin. And how did that meeting go?
Well, Sophie, the words were definitely warm. Angela Merkel referred to the Prime Minister as Liebe Theresa, dear Theresa, and the Prime Minister responded with a Dankeschön, a thank you in German. But no niceties could hide the awkward position that the women found themselves in. The Prime Minister came here to Berlin ahead of a stormy few days in British politics with a plea for all of the EU not to rush into rubbish a new UK negotiating plan for Brexit when it emerges. Of course, for the Prime Minister, it's hard enough to keep her unruly cabinet together. A direct attack from the EU would only weaken her even further. Now, from the EU perspective, they want to wait until this new plan is official. They want to have it approved, it's particularly on customs in this case, by the cabinet and then hand it over to Brussels. But from Angela Merkel's perspective, ever since the referendum, she's turned the Prime Minister's words on herself. Brexit means Brexit, she says. You leave the club, you lose a special relationship. The UK can decide after Brexit to keep the EU close or keep it at arm's distance, as long, says Angela Merkel, as it respects EU rules.
Katya Adler in Berlin, thank you.
The whole cabinet has now seen Theresa May's new Brexit policy ahead of the special meeting at Chequers tomorrow. But it remains to be seen whether Brexit-supporting ministers will be prepared to back the plan, which would keep Britain aligned to EU customs for goods and agriculture. The Brexit Secretary, David Davis, is reported to have warned the Prime Minister that the plan is likely to be rejected by the European Union. Hoping to avoid that outcome, Mrs May met the German Chancellor, Angela Merkel, in Berlin to brief her on the new policy this afternoon. Our political editor, Gary Gibbon, has this report.
Theresa May has been briefing Chancellor Merkel on the negotiating positions she hopes to get past her cabinet tomorrow. She wants to sail close enough to the EU's demands for them to feel they're worth engaging with, without losing pro-Brexit cabinet ministers outraged at the compromises.
Tomorrow, I will be bringing my cabinet together to discuss and decide a substantial way forward, which will enable the pace and intensity of the negotiations to increase.
At Chequers, ministers will be asked to agree to back a plan that involves accepting EU regulations for goods and agricultural goods, an approach to customs arrangements, which the Brexit Secretary has already rubbished. The plan implies accepting European Court of Justice decisions, maybe through a hybrid court. David Davis has had 3 testing meetings with the Prime Minister in the last few days, objecting to much of that. Friends say at Chequers tomorrow he will criticise huge chunks of the White Paper. Boris Johnson is said to be unhappy with the briefings he's had and has conveyed that personally to the Prime Minister. Some pro-Remain Tories are actually hoping that one or both of them, maybe others, actually walk out of the cabinet, giving Theresa May space to pursue her approach. Some pro-Brexit backbenchers are hoping they walk in order to throw the whole policy into reverse.
I want to make it absolutely clear that any cabinet ministers happen to be watching this, that they have a responsibility. Every single Conservative member was elected on a platform of endorsing the referendum result, by leaving the single market, by leaving the customs union, and by leaving the written exchange, not coming up with some botch where for some reason goods are allowed in and services are excluded, and that will be a complete mess.
Theresa May's previous big Brexit interventions were speeches designed to nudge the process forward and get thumbs up from both Remainers and Brexiteers in the party. Chris Wilkins helped to write those speeches and says this moment is different.
Do you think one of the measures of whether Chequers is a success is that one side's got to look unhappy?
I think to a degree that's true. I think if everyone comes out proclaiming success and the typical briefings that come out before the sort of official statement and everyone's claiming success, then that's a sign that probably we haven't got the clarity that we need, and I think now the public want now.
It looks a safe bet that Brexiteers will not be dancing down the gravel drive at Chequers. The 100-page white paper promises a legally binding agreement to ongoing harmonisation with the EU and acknowledges that diminishes the chances of the Brexiteers' dream of a US trade deal. Number 10 believes you have to nudge closer to the EU's demands to avoid the EU turning round and flatly refusing the British negotiating position.
It's quite a narrow landing strip because everyone is concentrating on one half of the discussion, which is the discussion inside the British cabinet. But of course, the deal that they put forward has to be negotiable with the European Union as well.
And we're not leaving only to return to the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice.
People sense the red lines are out of the customs union, out of the single market, so no rule-taking, no more European Court of Justice, no paying in, nothing that looks like freedom of movement. Where policy is landing at the moment, all of those could go.
Well, I think there's compromise in all these areas, but I think it's, we're not going to be in a situation that's exactly the same as we have now.
No, but de facto it could look and feel very similar.
Well, I think there will be areas of policy that seem similar, but it is a negotiation.
Number 10 will be alarmed to hear that some of the pro-Brexit ministers from this last Chequers gathering are tonight meeting at Boris Johnson's office to discuss the Prime Minister's plans. There could be more changes demanded. But at the end of tomorrow, all who stay in the room are supposed to be supporters of the new approach.
Gary Gibbon reporting. The Brexit roadshow rumbles on. As we heard earlier, Mrs May is on a charm offensive in Berlin with Angela Merkel. Can she convince the Iron Chancellor to back her latest customs compromise? Will it keep the Brexiteers off her back at tomorrow's Crunch cabinet meeting? Here's our take in the latest Brexit Minute. Has the football gone to some people's heads? The Austrians, who are now running the EU, say they are not ruling out going to extra time on negotiations. Yikes. Right, big question of the day. Which of these beasts do you think the Brexit faithful are more scared of? Brino, B-R-I-N-O, that's short for Brexit in name only. Many Brexiteers reckon that's what Theresa May is about to deliver. Or could it be a Jaguar? Owen Paterson has been telling the car company they'd be far better off under Brexit. Or maybe Anna Soubry's the one to fear. She told him he was talking tosh. It's probably enough to make you want to flee Westminster altogether, which the PM duly did, into the loving arms of Angela Merkel. It's crunch time for the Cabinet tomorrow as they gather at an English country mansion, often the scene of many a grisly tale. Mrs May will be hoping nothing nasty happens, and so no requirement for that most famous of Europeans, Hercule Poirot. There are 267 days to Brexit. Or are there?